I've been shooting night photography pretty much since I first picked up a camera, and over the last near decade of shooting it, I've picked up a lot of tips and tricks and things to look out for in the field to achieve a cinematic look to my photos. So today we're going to cover essential camera settings and field techniques to help you capture cinematic images straight out of camera. Step 1 is ditch auto white balance. It's convenient, but for the cinematic look, we need control. Auto white balance tries to be correct, but the cinematic look comes from the intentional use of color to create mood. So take a look at these two images side by side. The left uses auto white balance, the right uses manual. And notice the shift in emotion between them. With auto white balance, the camera neutralizes the man's white shirt and drains all the warmth from the image. With manual white balance, we keep that warmth and create a nostalgic, moody atmosphere. And it always looks a lot more natural when you do it with white balance rather than trying to force it in later with something like color grading. So for a warm look, set your camera to daylight around 5000 Kelvin or cloudy at 6000 Kelvin. You can fine tune this in post, push and pull it a little bit if it's too much or not enough, and sometimes I'll also desaturate the oranges and yellows if they're too strong right at camera. For a cool cyberpunk palette, I want to use white fluorescent or tungsten. White fluorescent's gonna lean more that blue, pink, purple color scheme, and tungsten's gonna lead more blue and green. But both provide strong stylistic bases. And yes, of course, white balance can be changed in post, but when you set it in camera, it helps you commit to a style. When I decide ahead of time, warm and nostalgic or cool and futuristic, I see things differently. It gives me direction, which leads to stronger compositions, better storytelling, and more cohesive image sets. So the second important thing you need to do is expose for the highlights. This is one of the most important settings in night photography. This approach helps you preserve detail and makes your images feel closer to how they looked in real life. Check out this raw file as an example. It's dark, and that's totally okay. There's a huge contrast between the artificial lights and the surrounding shadows, but if your highlights are still intact, we can bring those back in post and bump our shadows back up. Digital cameras recover shadow detail much better than blown out highlights. Once something is pure white, that detail is gone, but shadows are flexible, and denoise features have gotten so much better in the last few years, you don't really have to worry about that. The best way to judge whether your highlights are intact is with the histogram. The graph is a visual representation of the brightness levels in your image. Your black point on the far left and your white point on the far right. And if the graph is pushed up all the way against the right side, that highlight information is lost. I like to keep the histogram on the back of the screen and even inside of my electronic viewfinder so that I can always be paying attention to where this information is so that I always have the right exposure. I usually set my aperture first, somewhere between f1.8 and f4, depending on my lens and how much I want in focus. Remember that f1.8 will let a ton of light in, but your focus is going to be shallow. If you're shooting close up or fast moving scenes, your background's gonna blur out really fast and it might be hard to get focus. Something like f2.8 will give you a little bit more wiggle room. You'll also get that same wiggle room shooting with a wider lens or shooting a scene from further away. I'll go shutter speed next. I usually have a minimum shutter speed depending on the lens that I'm using or depending on how fast people in the area are moving. That's usually somewhere between 1/125th and 1/250th of a second at the minimum. And then ISO last to get the right level of brightness. From there, I'll go back and forth between ISO and shutter speed depending on the scene that I'm in and how fast people and myself are moving. A lower ISO is going to get you a cleaner image, but sometimes in a busy city, it's worthwhile to have a faster shutter speed to make sure you catch any fast moving action. It can seem intimidating going back and forth between all of these settings, but as long as you keep that minimum shutter speed, you'll be okay. Assuming you're photographing moving people and not static objects, go as slow as you want if you're shooting buildings or landscapes on a tripod. A lot of night photography happens really quickly, and I have so many images with wild camera settings, unnecessarily fast shutter speeds because I'm reacting quickly and it's more natural on my camera to go for the shutter speed wheel than the ISO wheel. But it's better to get a shot acting quickly than miss it because you want the lowest ISO possible. All right, so let's jump into a little bit of editing. Here we have our raw file that we just looked at. So I'm gonna start by getting a nice base exposure. So I'm gonna bring that exposure up and drop those highlights down. See how that information comes back, because in my raw file I exposed for the sign to make sure that the detail was still there. I'll bring my shadows up a little bit, get a little bit more detail, a little bit of blacks. I find that that gives a little bit of a softer look. Drop the whites a little bit. What I also like to do is I'll go into the tone curve and flatten the white point at the top here a little bit. This makes sure that it's not pure white, and that gives it a little bit more of that cinematic feel. I'll bring my highlights up a little bit and my shadows down for some contrast. Raise those mid-tones so we get a little bit more punch in the center of the image there. This is a nice starting point. I might want to bring the temperature up a little bit more to get a little bit more of that warm look. And then from here, the next important part is that we're gonna go into masking. So in my masking tab here, I'll go and let it detect people, and it detects my subject here as person number 3, and I get that mask. So let's create that. And now we see that our subject is selected. So I'm gonna make him a little bit brighter. And it's okay that he's hazy because this is a hazy environment. And now from here, what I'm going to do is give him a little bit more contrast. And then I'm going to create a radial gradient because now I want to work on the background. So I'm going to draw that here in the center, feather that out nicely. And then I want to subtract my subject because I don't want to brighten him any more than I already did. So we're going to subtract him. And now we see our mask. This red part here is the background without the subject selected. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to brighten that up. And here we've got a really nice pop going on because we have a dark subject. He's in a all black suit with dark hair, and he's on a lighter background now. So from here, what I'm going to do now is basically counteract the brightness that we brought to the edges of the frame when we raised our exposure. So I'm going to draw another mask. I'm going to invert it and bring that feather down. So that red area is where our mask is going to affect our scene. And basically, I just want to draw the eye back into the subject who is in the middle. So I'm going to drop that exposure down, and you'll see the edges of our frame start to get darker. Now here we have a really great base cinematic exposure. If we go and look at the before and the after, this was created entirely with the basic panel here with light and a couple masks. We did our subject mask, we brought him up to make him stand out more, and then we brightened our space behind him so that we have a dark subject on a light background, which you're gonna find a lot in night photography when you start to backlight things. And then we just brought our edges of our frame down to draw the eye back in to the center of the frame. So at this point, you could be done here. If you want to add a little bit more style, you can add in some clarity for some extra detail, go into that color panel, and maybe here I want to add a little bit more warmth to my midtones. I often like to color grade with cool colors in the shadows and warm colors in the highlights. So I'm gonna add a little bit of green to our shadows and a little bit of a nice warm color to the highlights. And at this point, it's really just a matter of fine-tuning it to preference. If I want to darken this left-hand side over here, that's feeling a little bit bright, I can go and grab a linear gradient, darken the frame from left to right, and that's just gonna bring the eye back into the middle. And the last finishing thing that I like to do on pretty much every image is crop. So if you look over here on the right side, we have this sign over here with this lady smiling in this advertisement. Our eye naturally goes to faces. So I want to take that out and then recenter. If I hit O on my keyboard, I can change the mask overlay. So you'll see I went from 3x3 to this 5x5 mask, and I'll just toggle through until I get my center points. And now I know that my subject is lined up here, and there we go. This is a really great cinematic exposure now. It's moody, the eye gets drawn into the subject, and our highlight detail is preserved. It's okay to have a lot of dark points in the image because it's nighttime. It adds to that drama and that atmosphere. There's a certain level of mystery to nighttime because you can't see everything clearly. So it's okay to have large areas of darkness in your image. So that covers your shooting and your editing. And my last tip is really just to keep it simple with your gear and your compositions. I often shoot with just a single prime lens, my 50mm 1.8. It's tiny and light and it doesn't weigh down on my shoulders, which makes sure that I can stay out longer and continue shooting. I like the tighter focal length because it helps simplify my framing and forces clarity of subject. You really have to be intentional with what's important in the image and what's not, and all those extra distractions get cut out, which is super important to the cinematic feel. In a basic sense, films tell stories about people, right? So if we want our images to feel cinematic, they have to do the same thing. I often aim to photograph people in motion or interacting with each other. Even better if they are holding something that adds to the story, like a briefcase or an umbrella. This gives the feeling that something happened before this moment that I froze in the photograph and something happens after. And then the viewer can fill in the blanks in their head with their own ideas. So much of night photography is about observation, watching scenes unfold and spotting interesting characters before they walk into your scene. A single prime lens helps me stay in that observational mindset and it keeps my kit light so I stay out longer. With a prime, you're not zooming in and out, trying to decide your look. I've been there, 35, 85, 100, 24. You stick with one focal length and you train your eye to see the world through that lens. And then your images start to improve because you see every scene from that field of view. So when you put it all together, manual white balance to get your color tone to set that atmosphere, exposing for the highlights to get the best raw file possible, using masking to shape the light and add mood and drama, and keeping it simple with your lens and your compositions, you can really start to bring out that cinematic feel in your images. And of course, one last one, turn your camera horizontal. We've been trained by Instagram to shoot vertically, but films are obviously presented horizontal, so that one's a quick win. Remember, the key to cinematic night photography is creating an atmosphere and telling a story. Both require intention and creative thought when you're shooting. If you know what look you're going for before you even start shooting, you'll be able to get into the right frame of mind and set yourself up for success from the get-go. Night photography isn't easy. It takes a lot of practice, but it's extremely rewarding once you get the hang of it because you're able to capture something that not everybody else can. And that's it. Hope you guys learned something. If you did, let me know in the comments below. If you have any further questions, be sure to put them down there as well, and I'll get back to you as best I can. And of course, be sure to look out for the next one. Peace.